Hello, welcome to the 2021 St. Colette Bible Study program. My name is Dick Wright, and tonight we start with the Dead Sea Scrolls, session 1 of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the two external to the Bible sources for information, both about early Judaism, or at least Judaism in the from about 200 before Christ to about 100 after, and early Christianity. It's a fascinating topic. Speaking of topics, we're going to cover, after the introduction, there were four scholars who were very much involved in excavating and studying the scrolls. We're going to look at what's called the Qumran community. Qumran is the location, and we'll be showing you that in a few moments, where the area where most of the scrolls were found. The sect, the Qumran sect, we will compare to the early Christians. The Qumran sect, another word for them is the Essenes. The Essenes were a splinter group from the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots, who stayed away from other groups and were very much against them. We'll take a look at what was found in each of the Qumran caves. There are other locations where texts were found, and then we'll conclude this first session. You can see on the left a picture of one of the fragments of the scrolls, but they were rarely in this condition. They're joined together as if they were a book. Most of the scrolls, however, were in the condition on the right-hand side, fragments. And those fragments caused many difficulties, but difficulties that were worthwhile in trying to put together what the scrolls said. What are these scrolls? They're ancient Jewish religious manuscripts that were found on the West Bank in the Qumran caves on the northern shore of the Dead Sea. We'll take a look at a map in just a few moments. They date from the last 3 centuries before the Common Era and into the 1st century of the Common Era. They're historically and religiously significant. They include the second oldest surviving manuscripts of works later included in the Hebrew Bible. And almost all of these are held by the state of Israel in the shrine of the book, which is on the grounds of the Israel Museum. Why are they so important? Because they shed unprecedented, new, exciting light on the transition from biblical to post-biblical Judaism during those last 2 centuries before the Common Era. And just as important, they throw light on the development of Christianity as an offshoot of Judaism during the 1st century CE, the Common Era. We need to remember that Jesus was a Jew, and the early Christians were not called Christians. They were a community following Jesus. Jesus is a Jewish preacher. How many texts are there? Well, about 1,000, 9 out of 10 of them in Hebrew. A few in Aramaic, but 40% are manuscripts of the Old Testament. Every book except Esther. Most were written on parchment, a few on papyrus, and one even on copper. Almost none were found intact. As I said, mostly fragments, which demanded a lot of work. The great majority of these items were found in the period 1948 through 1954 during a systematic exploration of the caves of Qumran, while that part of Israel was under Jordanian rule. You'll see on the map where Qumran is. This again is the Essene community. It's south of Jericho, east of Jerusalem, on the west bank of the Dead Sea. We'll go into more detail on that. The initial find was serendipitous. As a matter of fact, they were found by a goat, a shepherd who goat got away from the herd, ran up the side of a hill, ran into what we now call Cave 1, and the rest is history. The Bedouin shepherd, following the goat, found a number of jars, pottery jars, fairly large, containing a number of scrolls. Realizing that these were probably very important, and being very worldly wise, he made sure to bring some with him. And they went through a period back and forth of being sold and bought. We won't get into those details. The clay pots are very important because they preserved the scrolls better than they were preserved in other caves in which there were no pots. The picture you see is in the center is the entrance to what we now call Cave 4, which is the most famous of the caves because it yielded the highest number of ancient texts. How did the scrolls wind up in that cave? Cave 1. We know how they were found, but how did they get there? Well, a community of Jews lived nearby in what is now an archaeological ruin, easily visible from Cave 4, known as Khirbet Qumran. Khirbet Qumran is the city the Essenes lived in. The Essenes stored their sacred writings for safekeeping shortly before the Roman army advanced toward the Dead Sea region. You recall that starting in the year 67 of the Common Era, the Romans marched to destroy Jerusalem and drive the Jews out of that territory because the Jews were revolting against the Romans. Another explanation, but not as cogent, for that Cave 1 was that it might have been a library for the Essenes, but that's unlikely. The next two slides show a number of terms which it's important to have as background. Apocalypticism is a religious belief that the end of the world is imminent. It's coming very soon, even within one's own lifetime. And we have seen and will see again in various programs that Jesus himself was an apocalypticist who felt the end was coming while that generation was still living. Aramaic is the Semitic language that became the common language in the Near East. It's the language Jesus, as well as most Jews, spoke. The diaspora is a Jewish community living outside Israel. They're dispersed. That's what diaspora means. And for instance, one of those areas was Alexandria in Egypt, which we'll refer to shortly. The halakha is a Hebrew term for Jewish law. We'll see one of the documents is based on the halakha. It's the Jewish law that was formulated, written about by the rabbis over a period of time. Jericho is the nearest city in Israel to Qumran, as we said. There are two other words that would be important to know. Eschatology, eschatology, is the general belief in the end of days, the end time. The Hasmoneans were the dynasty founded by the Maccabees, lasting from 164 BCE to 6 of the Common Era. The Hasmoneans figured to some extent, into this milieu. Khirbet Qumran, the Arabic name of the site near the Qumran caves. It's what the Essenes themselves called their city. Masada may be familiar to us. It was the remote fortress in the Judean desert, north of Jerusalem and north of Qumran. The Mishnah was the first codification of Jewish law around the 200 of the Common Era. Qumran, as we said, is the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Septuagint was the translation of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, into Greek by the Jews residing in Alexandria, Egypt, around 250 BCE. The Talmud was the central text of Rabbinic Judaism, their primary source, the rabbis' primary source of Jewish religious law and theology. The Torah means teaching, and it's another name for the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible. And the Yahad means community. It's what the Qumran sect called itself. You'll see on the next 2 slides the sources utilized for developing this program. I'd recommend highly that first source on the left, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's a video program, a DVD, written and spoken by a Jesuit priest who's an expert on Qumran. There were 4 very important scholars of the Bible who were involved in unearthing and/or interpreting the Dead Sea Scrolls. From left to right, Roland de Voux, O.P., a Catholic priest; Emmanuel Tov, a Jewish scholar; Jody Magnus, an American archaeologist, and we'll see archaeology figures very importantly in the analysis of the scrolls; and a man named Getza Vermes. Let's start with Father de Voux, a French Dominican who led the Catholic team initially working on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He worked from 1951 to 1956. The first scrolls, you'll recall, were found in 1947, but under Jordanian rule. So Father de Voux was not allowed to be part of that very initial group. He excavated the site of Khirbet Qumran in those years, 51 to 56, as well as several caves nearby. It turns out there were 13 altogether caves as of this moment in time that were found in that area. And Father de Voux wrote comprehensively on what archaeology revealed about ancient Israel. In 1959, he lectured at the British Academy and concluded the following: Qumran was inhabited from 135 BCE to after 73 of the Common Era. The nearby caves containing the scrolls were related to the settlement at Qumran. Both the settlement and the caves featuring similar artifacts. And the site was the home of a Jewish sect, the Essenes. Father de Voux was the first person to call the group the Essenes. Father de Voux also coined the term ancient witnesses, by which he meant literature, art, science, religion, and institutions of a people, the various institutions present in different civilizations, taking into account all the traces of the past. He emphasized very much the archaeological aspect. And he said, while written documents have the pride of place, they actually say what was written. However, things which survive, even humble remains, are also crucial and can't be passed over. Emmanuel Tov is a Hebrew University professor, very much involved with the Dead Sea Scrolls, co-founder of the foundation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a member of the Orion Center for the Study of the Scrolls, and under his guidance, he oversaw production of the 33-volume Discoveries in the Judean Desert. Hermes was a scholar of ancient Judaism as well as early Christianity. He's best known for his research on the Dead Sea Scrolls and other ancient Hebrew writings in Aramaic, and also translated the Dead Sea Scrolls into English. Doctor of Theology, he was the first to write a dissertation on the scrolls. And he was one of the first scholars to examine the scrolls after their discovery in 1947. Jody Magnus, her most relevant background is archaeology, also as a scholar of religion. She's the Distinguished Professor of Early Judaism at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She has a bachelor's in archaeology and history from Hebrew University, and her doctorate is in classical archaeology. This whole examination of the Dead Sea Scrolls presented a wonderful challenge, and it became an interdisciplinary process. We've seen a bit of that referring to the background of the four scholars. In identifying, reconstructing, translating, and interpreting the Qumran texts, not to mention assigning meaning to them in the larger context of ancient Judaism, early Christianity, and biblical studies. Scroll scholars range widely through the fields of philology, the study of language, literary analysis, how things are put together, ancient history, and beyond. The fragmentary state of evidence makes such interdisciplinary work a necessity, but as I said, it's also an opportunity to contextualize the evidence in new ways, producing new analysis and potentially reconfiguring the larger picture of the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were a unique discovery. They present a new phenomenon in Jewish literature, offering exclusive information about the thoughts and practices of a specific community, namely the Qumran Essene community, produced by that group itself in an era predating any other similar literature. And with that, we'll end this session. I look forward to your coming back to see session 2 of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thank you.